This is Natural Selection Lesson 1.4 Activity 2. In this lesson, you're going to be using the natural selection simulation. In a previous lesson, when you use a sim, I told you you needed to download the natural selection app through self-service. So when you click on this to open it, you shouldn't do that. You should go to your app, the natural selection simulation app, to get to the simulation. If you haven't downloaded that yet, please do that before you continue watching this video. So we're going to be in the natural selection simulation, and once this loads, you can see that it tells us to go to fur and temperature A mode. So how to get there is you click on the hamburger and then fur and temperature A mode. So in the future videos, I'm going to have this loaded ahead of time so we don't have to sit here and wait on the video. So make sure that when you go to the sim, you go to that actual app. All right, so in this mode, you can see it's a little bit simpler. There's a temperature slider here that you're going to be using, and there is a traits histogram window in run. And so you don't want to just go there, you want to go through next, because you can change these options, but you're not necessarily going to change all the options, but you want to go next, next, and then you select run, and then you'll see that there's a traits histogram window that popped up. So now you can see the histograms in real time and observe what's happening. So if you want to look at the this will tell you what organism, and then this will tell you what trait. So we're just looking at one organism, ocelope and fur in this. And so you can watch this in real time. And then if you want to watch it going faster, you can zoom or speed it up to 4 times, or you can go slower to half time. And then when we analyze, you can see there's a generation slider. So if I want to look at generation 2, I can move it to there, or I want to look at the last generation. It was ran for 9 generations. What you need to know is that the gray striped boxes are the initial histogram. So this is what it was like when we started it, when we first pressed run, and then the blue is how it is changing. And so you can compare the histograms to the other generations over time. All right, so I'm going to go back to build, and then I'm going to press rebuild to reset it. So you can see that we have, if I go to Australope, we can see the initial histogram here. This is the same distribution of fur traits as the warm-up for generation 1. So the generation 1 histogram for fur traits of Australopes was the same as the warm-up as it is here. You can see that they have been living in a warm environment, and what we're going to do is we're going to change it to be colder. So you will be going to Amplify, and you will be completing this activity by following these instructions. So you'll change the temperature to cold by moving the temperature slider. So you'll go here and you'll move this to 1. And as you run it, and you're going to see what happens over 50 generations. So if I go next, next, we're not being told to change anything else. We're going to run this for 50 generations, and you can see the generation here. So obviously, it's going to be a good idea to speed it up. We're going to do 50 generations, and you should zoom in. You should zoom in and select the different Australopes if you can select on one and see what's happening to them. So once 50 generations have passed, you're going to select Analyze. And then based on your analysis, you'll upload a screenshot of the fur trait histogram at generation 50, and then you're going to answer a couple of questions. So I want you to go back to Amplify, go to lesson 1.4, activity 2, and complete this sim activity on page 1. And so pause the video, go to Amplify, go to lesson 1.4, activity 2, complete the sim activity on page 1, and when you're done, come back to the video and play the video. If you have to start the video over, it's going to be at about 5.5 minutes. Alright, so now that you have completed the sim activity, we need to talk a little bit about it. So from your observations in the sim, we could see that the distribution of traits in a population can change in a predictable pattern. So if there's a change in the environment, then over a long period of time, there will be a change in the distribution of traits in a population. So in this example, we observed that when the environment gets colder, the traits for fur in the Australope population shifted in a predictable way. So after many generations, the high fur level trait became more common in the population. So I'm just going to press analyze, even though we're not quite to 50 on this one, so that I can show you that. So we start off, we change the temperature to be colder, and this was the initial variation of traits where the distribution was on the lower fur. But as it gets colder, we can see that the traits are shifting over in a predictable way. As the temperature gets colder, more Australopes with more fur exist in the population. The distribution has the traits of more fur. So this makes sense. In an environment is all the living and non-living things in an area. So the environment includes things like temperature, rainfall, plants, and animals. So the environmental factor that we focus on in the sim was temperature. So the question is, what were the adaptive traits in the sim mode? In other words, which traits helped individual Australopes survive best in the cold environment? So an adaptive trait is a trait that makes it more likely an individual will survive in a specific environment. So in this instance, the trait of fur in a cold environment, the adaptive trait was more fur on the Australopes would make them more likely to survive in a cold environment. So what were the non-adaptive traits? So what traits make it less likely that an individual Australope would survive in a cold environment? So a non-adaptive trait is a trait that makes it less likely an individual will survive. So if the specific environment is cold, a trait that will make them less likely to survive is low fur. Having low amounts of fur in a cold environment will make you less likely to survive. Having high amounts of fur in a cold environment will make you more likely to survive. So the trait that makes you more likely to survive is called the adaptive trait, and the trait that is more likely for you not to survive is the non-adaptive trait. So another thing to think about is, were the individuals with non-adaptive traits able to change to an adaptive trait in the middle of their lifetime? So if you look at the sim, you'll see that the ones that have the low fur, they don't just automatically have more fur. They can't just change. They can't evolve on their own. So you can't just change your trait. You either have the adaptive trait or you do not. Either you have high fur level and you can survive in a cold environment, or you do not have a high fur level and survive in a cold environment. Make sure you press hand in, and that's the end of this video.